2000 election carried with it the largest support for a third-party candidate in modern presidential election history. More than just the traditional two-party system, with candidates Al Gore and George W. Bush, many Americans chose the third-party option of Ralph Nader. However, by using their democratic right to vote for the candidate they most wanted to see win, they ended up surrendering everything and giving the presidency to the last person that all of them wanted to see in office, Bush. This is the problem with the first past the post voting system. It forces people to vote strategically instead of truly democratically. It is because people voting their conscience shouldn't cost them everything that I stand in the affirmation. Firstly, let's talk about the failures of the first past the post voting system. In a democracy, people should never be forced to settle on their ideals. They should vote for the person who most aligns with their ideals, not just because they are the only realistic alternative. In the first past the post voting system, people have to compromise on their internal values to vote for someone that they believe can realistically win that shares some of their values. Additionally, beyond just this compromise aspect, it ends up splitting the votes between like-minded candidates, giving the office to the person that the majority of people disagreed with the most. An example of this is the aforementioned Gore-Nader split, but that is a general election. This bill deals with primaries. And while that might seem less important, because ideally anyone should be okay with any member of their party winning the nomination, in 2020, that is simply not the case. Paul Starr of the American Prospect finds that since the 2016 election, the Democratic Party has been pushed in two separate directions, a progressive wing and a moderate, almost conservative wing. These wings manifested themselves in the 2020 primary in the form of Sanders and Warren on the progressive side and Biden and Buttigieg on the moderate side. Nate Silver of 538 found that a majority of all Democratic primary voters were interested in one or two candidates and only those one or two candidates. That means that these wings are slowly looking more like parties nestled within their own party. And so we're going to see the same problems that we did with the Nader-Gore split in these primaries. In the status quo, if there were two candidates from one wing and one from the other, it would have the exact same effect as the Nader-Gore split in 2000, resulting in a majority of voters not being satisfied with the candidate and instead having the person that they least wanted to win be the candidate. The same can be said for the Republican Party. While Trump seems to have most of the support, there are still those moderates that are led by Romney. The truth is, as our country gets more and more polarized, so too do our parties. And implementing an RCV system in the primaries would be effective in allowing for the people to vote their conscience instead of their strategy. It is because in a democracy, no one should be forced to compromise their ideals when there is an alternative that I stand in the affirmation.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 13 seconds. We're now live for 2 1-minute blocks of questioning. All questioners, please rise. I'll go to Senator Kumar.
Hi, Senator. So this bill affects primaries, right? It affects primaries, right, Senator?
Yes, this bill.
And so who runs primaries and caucuses?
It's the parties themselves. The convention.
Right. So the federal government has no involvement.
I knew I was going to get this argument, but the truth is, like, we don't have any involvement in it, but we can pass laws to regulate it. Just like we don't have any involvement in the private sector.
Really, Senator. So you're saying the federal government can tell the so Senator, just to be clear, you're saying the federal government can tell the parties how they choose their candidates.
I'm saying that if we pass a law, then we gain the right to do that. Yes.
So we can just pass any law we want. Is that what you're saying? We gain
the power.
Where in the Constitution do we have the power to tell the parties?
As long as it's constitutional, we can.
Okay, Senator,
we can
just
do it as long as
give me a yes or no, please, Senator.
Bill,
is this piece of legislation
same thing as with the private sector? This bill is constitutional.
Yes or no, is this legislation constitutional? Yes, it is. Really?
It's the exact same as regulating the private sector. We can do the exact same thing there.
Next block. Senator Kumar, you get the next block. Go ahead.
Right. So, Senator, we can regulate the private sector through the Commerce Clause, right?
Yes.
Does that apply to political parties?
So what I'm saying is that if we pass a law that is constitutional, which I'd like to see you say that this isn't that this is unconstitutional in your speech, I'll be looking forward to that. But if you're saying we can pass
gives us the power to political parties. You're saying we can pass any law related to the political parties.
I'm saying that we have the power to do that, yes.
Okay, so
Not
the federal
any
government can
per
pass a
se,
law
but this
mandating that the
falls
political parties
under our
pick the candidate who gets the least votes. You're saying that's constitutional?
No, but what I'm saying is that if we're, well, I'm saying that yes, it would be constitutional, but we wouldn't do that. What we're doing here is we're increasing democracy, and that's
Where in the
point of our
Constitution is
country.
the power given to the federal government to mandate to the parties how they choose their candidates or assign their delegates? Where in the Constitution does that come up?
It's the exact same thing because we have the power to do that the exact same way that we have the power to regulate.
Time has elapsed. Speaker may be seated. Seeing that was a speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. I'll go to Senator Kumar unopposed.
Good afternoon. My name is Senator Kumar. My last name is spelled Kumar, and my speaker code is 125. For my judges, just let me know if you're not ready for me to begin. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and get started. And PH any indication. Alrighty. In my 7th grade civics class, I was taught about the value of a vote, how you should conduct careful research into the candidates before making your choice. And it's the same for this piece of legislation. When you do the research, you'll see that ranked choice voting should be last on your ballot. First, because it's simply unconstitutional in its form, and second, because of ballot exhaustion. Now, first, I want to explain how this piece of legislation is unconstitutional, the same argument I had with Senator Osborne in questioning for the last 2 minutes. So first, Stephen Smith reports for Brookings in July of 2016 that primaries and caucuses are run by the parties themselves. These are private political organizations. It's why some states have primaries, other states have caucuses. It's why the DNC has superdelegates. It's why in the recent Iowa caucuses, they chose to use an app that was unsecured and frankly a total failure, but it was their choice because it's run by the private parties who administer these caucuses and primaries. Understand, the federal government has no power to interfere in the inner workings of the DNC or the RNC. The precedent this would set, if we allow the government to tell the parties how to choose their candidates, is astounding. The whole point of our political process is to be free from current interference. Imagine telling President Trump and Mitch McConnell they could pass legislation today mandating that the Democrats choose Bernie Sanders instead of Joe Biden. Imagine if the same was the opposite for the Democrats. The fact of the matter is the federal government does not get a say in how the DNC or the RNC run things. This is established in a report by Paige Whitaker for the Congressional Research Service on November 2nd, 2016. Congress may only legislate in the states or in elections to uphold constitutional rights. That's why something like the Voting Rights Act is constitutional, because it's related to discrimination and race-based constitutional rights. But something like this is not. So unless the affirmation come up here and prove to me that the rights of our citizens are being abridged because of a first-past-the-post system, this piece of legislation is simply unconstitutional. This was further affirmed in Smith v. Allwright by the Supreme Court of the United States, where they ruled that the federal government has no say in how primaries are run by state organizations. Period. End of story. This legislation is unconstitutional, contrary to whatever Senator Osborne might say. But next, say in some dream world the Supreme Court changes and they rule this legislation constitutional, it still isn't worth it because of ballot exhaustion. Darren Taylor explains for the Washington Post on November 1st, 2018, that ballot exhaustion is a phenomenon that as more candidates get eliminated from a ranked choice ballot, more voters are exhausted if they didn't rank every candidate. So let's take the example provided by Senator Osborne. In the recent Democratic primary, if you were a moderate and you ranked Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, if those two get eliminated, your ballot is essentially worthless for the rest of the rounds. Now, Matt Vassalli-Gempros tells us on Pew Research Center on June 27, 2018, in Maine's Democratic primary for governor, more than 9,000 votes, almost 7%, were exhausted or thrown out, which means they weren't tallied in the final round of voting. In a democracy, every vote should count, but that doesn't happen in a ranked choice system. Understand, at the end of the day, not only is this legislation unconstitutional, but also exhausts votes, not even counting them at all. I urge your ballot in the negation, ranked choice voting last.
Thank you for that speech. 3 minutes exactly. All questioners, please rise. I'll go to Senator Sakina.
Hi, Senator. So right now, what happens if, say, I vote for, like, Bernie Sanders, but he doesn't end up being the primaries candidate?
Right. So if you vote for Bernie Sanders, your vote counts, right? And the number of delegates are assigned per state.
Yeah, but I'm saying, doesn't my vote have a better chance of being counted under a ranked choice system or in the status quo where I only have one choice?
No, that's not true. So I
What do you
understand
mean?
what I'm saying is your ballot isn't even counted in the final denomination in the final round of ranked choice voting system.
Okay, so in a primary system, say I vote in my Illinois primary for like Mr. Buttigieg.
Right.
He gets eliminated. Do I
Right.
have any say at all in now what the primaries candidate is?
So as I explained, right, the phenomena is most voters don't rank every candidate. So by the
Okay,
time you
but
get down
do
to the
they
final
still
two, a
have
significant
more
portion-
choice under a ranked choice system than
Senator,
that
as
is
I explained to you,
It's
and
a
I gave
simple
you the
question.
statistic, it was 9,000 ballots, 9,000 ballots
Okay,
in the main
what's
election. Voters didn't rank every candidate.
Do they
And
have
as a
to
result, the
rank?
ballots
Do they
were
have
eliminated.
any choice right now? Do they only
Yes,
have
your
one
choice
choice?
right now, your choice is added up. Every ballot is added up. In a ranked choice voting system in the final round,
Okay, so
not
say
every
I vote in
ballot is added
Iowa,
up.
right? It's like the
Yes.
first caucus. I vote for Mr.
Senator
Buttigieg.
Osborne.
All right, so let's go off that last line of questioning. Let's look at the first past the post voting system as if it were a ranked choice voting system. Isn't that just the equivalent of just choosing one person and then leaving your ballot?
No, Senator. So in the first past the post voting system, everyone's ballots are added up. In a ranked choice voting system, by the
Right,
time
but
you get to the final round, not everyone's
In
ballots
terms of
are
what
added up.
actually happened, right?
Say that again?
If your candidate loses, then you get no word in the vote. Your
Oh,
is, by your
that's
own
not
words,
what I'm saying. Okay,
exhausted.
so you're
right?
misunderstanding the
exact same
context
way
of
that it
argument.
would be thrown out. Sure, it might be counted.
Senator, you're not understanding what I'm arguing. What I'm saying is in a first past the post system, the count is done once. Every ballot is counted. In a ranked choice system, as
Why do the
counts
counts
go further and further,
matter
ballots are
if your
thrown out
vote
and
still
not
doesn't
counted
get
at all.
done?
The question is about ballots being counted. More ballots
why
are
do-
counted in the first past the post system.
Why does the counting matter if the outcome is the
Because in
exact
a democracy,
same?
we should count every vote. Every vote should have a say. That's not what happens as you get to
Right,
the
so
later
then why should we
ranked choice system.
compromise on their ideals?
Questioning
not
time
about
has elapsed.
compromise on their ideals.
Thank you. Seeing that was a speech in the negation, all affirmation speakers, please rise. All affirmation speakers, please rise. Senator Ambra, thank you.
I think the chair, this is Senator Amarvan speaking for the first time this session. Just give me an indication when you're ready from the judges and PO. Okay, great. Almost 300 years ago, founding father Benjamin Franklin wrote, "Well done is better than well said." So while this Congress speaks about equality and each person having a voice, we haven't actually done anything. Today, let's affirm to make sure the voice of every single American constituent is heard by implementing RCV. Because first, this legislation prevents votes from being wasted after early voting, contrary to what Senator Kumar says. For the 2020 election, primary voting in Iowa started on February 3rd. By the time other states had voted, dozens of candidates have dropped out. So the ballots are the same, but the candidate pool is not. Senator Kumar explains that RCV doesn't help with this problem, but he's fundamentally incorrect because The Atlantic in 2019 explains that RCV solves a dilemma unique to primary campaigns. The Kansas primary isn't until May 2nd, when the field of candidates will almost be surely smaller than it was before. But the filing deadline for candidates is in February, meaning that many Democratic contenders who quit the race in the interim will likely still have their name on the ballot. In 2016, more than 700,000 votes were cast in primaries for candidates who had already dropped out of the race, a wrinkle exacerbated by the rise of early voting. But this problem can be solved with RCV, because with RCV, you don't just vote for one candidate, you rank your candidates. So even if your first choice candidate drops out, you default to your second choice. Primaries span all the way from February to June, so the candidate pool shifts significantly in the meantime, but RCV eliminates this. Senator Kumar, you asked to hear how our voters are suffering. Well, we already have low voter turnout. RCV can help with that because now instead of 700,000 votes being wasted, we get to count them under this system, and it no longer hinders the democratic process. 100 years ago, I would have just gotten the right to vote. We pass today if we want to uphold our values and acknowledge the struggles of those who fought to have their voice heard. But next, this eliminates a method of voter fraud used by the Russians in 2016. One of the ways that the Russians manipulated the 2016 election was by convincing people to throw away their vote on a candidate who was likely to lose. The New York Times in February of 2018 explains that a big aspect of the Russian meddling was encouraging voting for a third-party candidate or an unpopular Democrat or Republican. One Russian ad urged progressives to choose peace and even vote for the Green Party nominee Jill Stein as the only way to take our country back. Russians are currently taking advantage of our voters by falsely promoting candidates who are unlikely to win in primaries. These are simply wasted votes, but RCV automatically eliminates this because less popular candidates typically drop out of the race quickly. So your second choice vote is much more likely to get counted. While we might be unaware of the extent to how many votes are actually influenced by this, whether it be 3 million or 3 votes, every single vote counts. So when Benjamin Franklin signed the Constitution, he hoped to bring the best for American people centuries later. As an advocate of the individual American voice, he would want us to vote and change the unfair system today and affirm.
Thank you for that speech. 2 minutes and 55 seconds exactly. 2 minutes of questioning. All questioners, please rise. I'll go to Senator Talriha.
Hi, Representative. Great speech, but I have one question. What if the people who voted for the candidate that already dropped out only voted for that candidate and that candidate alone?
Yeah, that's a good point. So RCV gives you the option to rank your candidates. So I'm sure that out of the 700,000 votes that weren't counted, that at least some of them would have ranked their candidates, meaning that we still are hearing the voices from more Americans.
But who are the people in our constituents population that are only ranking the candidates that have already dropped out?
So if we provide the option for RCV, I'm assuming that people are going to start at least ranking their top 3
But
choices.
who do we see currently ranking candidates that are not running? Are they less educated? And if so, which populations?
Well, the candidate pool shifts significantly. So a lot of the times people aren't aware of this, but the fact that
Who isn't aware though?
Uninformed voters.
And how does ranked choice voting help uninformed voters?
Because instead of just voting for their top choice, they have more options.
Thank you. Next block, we'll go to Senator Battad.
But basically, okay, let's talk about how ranked choice voting works, okay? So please tell me what the difference between ranked choice voting is and the current thing we have in the status quo.
Yeah, so ranked choice voting allows you to not just vote for a single candidate, but allows you to rank your candidates.
Okay. So your first candidate is the person who you believe has the most, who reflects your ideals the most, right?
Exactly.
And the second candidate is a person who's probably less reflects your ideals, but still has like the same moral goal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, let me prove why this is wrong. Because, like, okay, when you only have one vote, that encourages voters to research and ensure that their vote is going to a candidate that most reflects their ideals. But when you have 5 candidates, as this legislation proposes, doesn't that just make it worse? Doesn't that just your vote could go to a person who doesn't reflect their ideals at all?
With RCV, people actually have to look into even more candidates because they know they're not just going to be putting one single.
No, they just have to listen to the empty gestures that politicians give them, correct?
I believe they're going to be doing more research.
Questioning time's elapsed. Thank you.
Motion.
Take that motion, Senator Osborne.
Personal privilege, exit the chamber.
Granted. Seeing that was a speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. That'll go to Senator Morales.
Perfect, thank you. That's Senator Morales, spelled Morales. My school code is 109. Just any indication from my appealing judges when you're ready, I'll be more than happy to begin. Perfect. Ms. Rubis, ready? Great. As former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton once said, voting is the most precious right of every citizen, and we have a moral obligation to ensure the integrity of our voting process. While I 100% agree with this statement, Senators, affirming today's legislation is simply just not the right solution, so let's negate. But now first, negate because when it comes to ranked choice voting, what works on paper doesn't necessarily work on voting ballots. But now let me make it clear to the affirmation that the problem here is exhaustion, and not the kind that we're all experiencing right now, but instead this is ballot exhaustion, which happens when voters rank too few candidates to stay meaningful until the final runoff. So let me put it into perspective for you. Say there are 5 candidates running, but the voter only ranks 3, and all 3 are eliminated prior to the last round. And as a result of this, to answer your question, Senator Osborne, none of their votes would have gone to the winning candidate or the runner-up. In effect, their ballot doesn't figure in the outcome. Today's voting is a marginal problem, but its effects can be substantial. So to all senators in the affirmation, I understand is if your main problem with our system right now is the Electoral College, that it ignores the vote, but understand that today's legislation simply exacerbates this program. But now let's turn to Simon Watson with the Democracy Journal, which on November 3rd states that when ranked voice voting does produce majorities, they may be unconvincing. In 2010, the Australian Labor Party won the House of Representatives with just 38% of first-place voters on the initial ballot, while the second place, the Liberal National Coalition, captured 43. That hardly sounds like a firm mandate, senators. And don't get me wrong, I agree with the affirmation if they come here and state that we have to eliminate the Electoral College. But replacing it with ranked choice voting is just counterintuitive. But now second, negate, because when Senator Osborne and Ambervan, they're mistaken because ranked choice voting doesn't diminish negative voting. It only perpetuates this system. And let me be the first senator in today's round to mention the fact that, for one thing, much of campaigning in America isn't even done by American candidates themselves, but instead done by ideologically driven political actions committees. A candidate may lay off a competitor in order to court second place ballots, but Heritage Action, Planned Parenthood, and other organizations don't have to gain anything from compromise. Let's turn to Anthony Green with ABC's chief elections analyst, where they say that the system may give life to more strident candidates hoping to siphon first place ballots from extreme voters who will give second preference to majority parties closest to them. If the negation in today's debate truly want to preserve the voice of the people, corruption is the wound that won't stop bleeding, and passing today's legislation only cuts deeper into that very wound. For the good of our country and for the good of our people, you negate.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 57 seconds. We're now live for 2 minutes of direct questioning. All questioners, please rise. Now we'll go to Senator Osborne unopposed.
Hey.
Right. Hello, Senator. So you talk about this idea of exhaustion. What are the impacts, like the tangible impacts, more than just their vote doesn't get counted? What are the impacts of their vote not being counted?
Well, personally, if you ask me, Senator, that's one of the worst issues we can have as Americans, especially as senators. All of us had to go through the voting process in order to have our seats in the Senate. So to me, we take away the valuable American right that we preserve in the Constitution. So that in itself proves to be one of the most unignored.
What I'm saying,
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, practically, in practice, what is the difference between someone's vote not being counted in that final runoff and the candidate they voted for losing, so they have no say whatsoever there?
Well, even that in itself, it shows a flaw in the election system. When we pass this legislation, we just exacerbate this even more. If you have a problem with our current system, we can find another solution. But today's solution simply exacerbates our current problems.
Question time's elapsed. Just Senator Batman.
Hey.
So why exactly is so I'm on your side, Senator. Why exactly is RCV worse than the current system?
Okay, well, at least right now, our current system actually provides our constituents with a say, as opposed to a ranked choice voting system. As I mentioned in my speech, you deliberately take away votes from people.
Yeah, so who researches more? A person who only has one vote or a person who has up to 5?
A person who has up to 5.
Are you sure about that? Would a person up to 5 vote more than a person with only 1?
Well, I mean, that's substantial. Honestly, like, it could be either or. That's really not a question that applies.
Okay. But besides that, why exactly? Okay, so actually, I'll yield the time to my chair.
Okay, perfect.
I think the chair.
Speaker may be seated. Seeing that was a speech in the negation, all affirmation speakers, please rise. I'll go to Senator Sakina.
Hi everyone. For the judges, my name is Senator Saxena, S-A-X-E-N-A. My speaker code, I believe, is 106. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but and I'm just gonna pull up a timer. All right. Mr. Kumar started today's debate by explaining about his 7th grade civics class, that if we take the most basic lessons that he learned in 7th grade civics, we would fail. But that's where the problem is. Mr. Kumar is basing his vote on something he learned in 7th grade. 7th grade civics is hardly an accurate representation of our system. Let's look at what the current reality is, and that's why you pass. So first, I want to contend with this major argument that votes are going to be wasted if we pursue ranked choice voting. Ms. Morales contends that there's still a chance that my vote won't be counted. Let's put this under an example. In Iowa, if I was to vote for Pete Buttigieg in the status quo, he would leave the race 2 weeks later, I have absolutely zero say in what the Democratic Party's nominee is. That's our status quo. But next, under a ranked choice system, I have a higher chance of having my vote being counted because I have the opportunity to list more candidates. But I agree that not everyone will list more than one candidate. But if we just run a quick comparative analysis, 20% of votes are being wasted in the status quo, as Ms. Amravan told you. Mr. Kumar told you that only 7% of votes were wasted in Maine. 20% of votes is simply just more than 7%. In the status quo, we waste more votes than if we pass. But next, Mr. Kumar also explains that the RCV is just unconstitutional. Of course, a law needs to be constitutional before we can pass it. As Fair Vote explains in October 2019, the RCV Act is constitutional, as Congress has the right to determine how its members are elected. We aren't directly interfering with the Democrats or the Republicans. We're putting a blanket statement over the entire election process that we have the power to regulate. In fact, that's why, as Fair Vote continues, that RCV is already being used in 11 cities, such as San Francisco, and the entire state of Maine. It can't be unconstitutional if it's already being used. So then next, what is the actual impact? We actually reduce political polarization. Mr. Batat explained that voters are going to research less because under a one-party system, they have to have more faith in their vote. That's exactly the problem. They need to be so certain in their vote, which leads to concerns about electability. As the New York Times explains in February 2020, Democrats believe that there is nothing more important than replacing Donald Trump. So instead of voting for a candidate they ideologically believe in, they are more concerned about whether that candidate actually has the ability to defeat Mr. Trump in an election. So even though a lot of Democrats won't agree with the positions that their first choice candidate actually faces, they're still going to pick them. Under a ranked choice voting system, the League of Women Voters of Vermont in 2020 explains that we minimize this process of strategic voting because instead of being compelled to vote for the lesser of two evils, voters can honestly say for who they believe is the best candidate. Let's not just listen to 7th grade civics, but examine our current political reality. Pass.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. All questioners, please rise. Senator Taliha.
Hi, Representative. So you say that we'd be throwing away less votes, but can you explain to me which votes we wouldn't be throwing away and what part of our population is that?
Throwing away the votes for the candidate that has the majority support.
No, I mean, in your speech, you mentioned that ranked choice voting eliminates some of the people who would only choose one candidate, right?
Okay, so the way that it works is that if no candidate wins like a majority outright, then the candidate with the lowest number of votes is knocked out. So if I voted for someone and they didn't get
Yeah, I understand that. But you said in the first past the post system, you did a comparative analysis where.
So
but can you tell me which votes are we still seeing that are being thrown away?
Yes, if I only vote for one candidate, or if I don't rank all of my candidates, and
and who are those people?
Americans, I'm not entirely.
Which population? We need to focus on which part of our population?
Even if it's one group of people,
yes. So can you explain to me what that specific group is?
Which group of people?
Senator Kumar.
Hi, Senator. So let's talk about constitutionality for a little bit, shall we? So you talk about how the RCV Act is constitutional because it relates to congressional elections, right?
Yes.
But this
No,
bill
because it says Congress has the ability to mandate our election process. So
right, but this isn't about congressional elections, is it?
What?
This bill isn't about congressional elections.
I'm not saying it's about congressional elections. I'm saying Congress has the ability to monitor all elections.
I'm on the very source you cited, right? You cited Fair Vote. I'll read you the quote. The RCV Act is constitutional as Congress has the right to determine how its members are elected. But this isn't about electing members of Congress, is it? No, I'm quoting the page.
Okay.
This is your own source.
I'm just going to give an example. You cited Maine. In Maine, 7% of votes were wasted.
Senator, I'm talking about the Constitution. I'm not talking about Maine.
Unconstitutional. That's a contradiction right there.
Senator, the idea is that it's unconstitutional for the federal government to tell parties how they run their elections.
In Maine, their primaries are based off of ranked choice voting.
That's because the Maine state legislature implemented it, right? The Maine state legislature passed that.
We're still it's
time elapsed. Thank you. Speaker may be seated. Seeing that was a speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. That was Senator Batad.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Murida. For the judges, this is Senator Batad, spelled Bhattad. My tab number thing is 103, or it's 106, and I will begin as soon as I can pull up a timer, and my judges seem to be ready. Right. Thank you. At the leisure of all those above me, a nod or smile when ready. It's one thing to not represent the majority of the people. It's another thing entirely to defy the groundwork of democracy itself. The very limestone we are encased in represents the people that we are here to represent and the people's voices that should be heard. And this bill defies that on every count. Now let's take a look at why we can't affirm this bill. Because what it does is it makes candidates start campaigning too early and shortens the attention span of our delegates. Firstly, senators and representatives are obligated to represent the needs and wants of our country, and that is the only reason why everyone in this chamber is here. Firstly, senators already take a vast amount of time campaigning when they should be in session. Let me be the first speaker on the negation to prove that this doesn't just hurt the future of our nation, but this also drains this attention span of our delegates that our states elect. Now, quote, the results for most candidates was a 40% missing rate during meetings for the sole reason of campaigning. And for representatives, it was 73%. Running for president is hard, and I understand that. But they need to you need adequate time to plan and conform to a voter's need. But by shortening the election process, it makes candidates start campaigning even earlier into their terms and neglect their civic duties even more. What this does is it hurts the democratic idea of having a Senate and a House and makes the people's needs and wants heard less. But then let's go to the arguments of the affirmation. All my points are just to reinforce an actual debate. But it's, as Senator Kumar said, and very well explained, this bill is literally unconstitutional because it basically asks that the federal government mandates the primaries, which are supposed to be run by the private parties. So just for the sake of debate, let's actually play out the entire argument of the affirmation. Firstly, let's take the affirmation at their highest point, which is the current system gives the people no say in the country's president. What ranked choice voting does is promote the idea of voter exhaustion. And let me prove that further. Senator Kumar had a great point, but let me add to it. Our current system allows for every person to vote for who they support most and to research their candidates fully to find a backer that they actually share ideals with fully. But in the ranked choice voting system, your second choice might still have opinions that you don't agree with. When you vote in the status quo, you can ensure that you might not go with the winner, but to a person who reflects your ideals and straight morals, instead of a person that might be your fourth choice who represents 2 to 3 of your takings. Let's take the example from Representative Saxena. Assume in Iowa where Buttigieg's votes go to Warren. Now, even on her side, they said that Buttigieg and Warren are completely different democratic ideals. Warren being a conservative and Buttigieg being I forget the name, but that means that they do not share most of their actual ideals, which means that the people are going to be voting for a person that they do not support. The current system is bad, and I will side with the affirmation on that. But implementing this vote will just worsen our ability to actually craft a vote, unravel the system of democracy, and just worsen our vote in totality. Our constituents deserve better, but by undermining our vote, it gives them little representation, and that's why we negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. All questioners, please rise. That will go to, offer recency, that will go to Senator Osborne.
Hi, Senator. So is there a Supreme Court case which says that this is unconstitutional?
I believe Senator Kumar gave you one.
Right. Senator Kumar talked about Smith versus Allwright. Can you tell me what Smith versus Allwright stated?
No, but I'm sure you can tell me.
Right. So essentially what Smith versus Allwright stated is that they can't interfere unless it is in the interest of fair methods and fair expression by the members of that party. So if that is the actual opinion of the Supreme Court,
these primaries are all run by private parties. So how would the federal government
are we not allowed
have any
to regulate anything? Right?
Sorry, wait,
We're
repeat
not allowed
your
to
question.
regulate anything private.
I still can't understand your question. Can you speak slower?
So are we not allowed to regulate anything that is private, that is not in the government?
The government is not allowed to regulate the states and private institutions. And I believe that is
And
what
why
you're
did Smith
saying.
versus Allright find that we
Question
could?
comes last. Senator Saxena.
Hi, Senator. So if I rank Pete first and Biden second, why would my votes go to Warren?
Okay, well let's okay. So both okay. Okay, that's a specific example, but most people would probably, and yours was also a specific example. If you rank Biden, or if you rank Buttigieg first and then Warren second, those
Okay, but
ideals
if I
conflict.
rank Warren second, doesn't that mean Warren is my second choice candidate?
Again, but it doesn't have to necessarily go to Warren. If Warren drops out, then that means you're
Okay,
both.
then I'll go to my third choice candidate. I don't really see what the problem is here.
The problem with this, the fact that if you have one choice in your candidate, and I showed you this
Okay, so if,
statistic.
like, let's go with that, right? If my main goal as a Democrat is to beat Trump, am I going to vote for the candidate that I most agree with, or the candidate that I think has the highest chance of defeating?
Okay, that's a specific
Okay, is that
thing.
the
But I
majority?
just showed you the statistics that said
right now?
when you have a single vote, the voters are 80% more likely to actually research their candidates instead of when you have a course of 5 votes.
Okay,
Question
so
comes last. Thank you. Speaker may be seated. Seeing that was speech in the negation, all affirmation speakers, please rise. All affirmation speakers, please rise. The chair highly frowns upon a one-sided debate. All negation speakers, please rise. All negation speakers, please rise. Senator Tawia.
I thank the chair. I'm Representative Tareja. For the judges, my number is 114. And as always, I stand at the leisure of all those above me. So give me any indication when you're ready and I'll begin. Okay. Imagine you had to rank 3 chocolate brands: Hershey's, Toblerone, or cheap generic chocolate. You hate cheap chocolate, so you rank it last, and then you rank Toblerone at the top, followed by Hershey's. But right as you're about to pay, the vendor says you can only get that cheap chocolate that you voted last because it won the ranking. How? Because even though the majority of shoppers downvoted that brand, there wasn't a clear agreement between the ranks of the other 2. This is the situation we adopt on the national scale if we pass today's legislation. Fail this bill because it muddles an otherwise clear majority and compromises American values. First, we negate the ranked choice voting system because its confusion disenfranchises voters. According to an October 3rd, 2018 CNBC article by Step, a Pew Research survey found that 34% of Republican voters and 32.5% of Democrats couldn't even name their own party's nominee for Congress. Now voters are expected to have informed choices in order of preference. Representative Kumar brought up how many citizens choose not to rank multiple candidates, but allow me to expand on who is impacted and answer Representative Saxena's question. Fair Vote, which supports ranked choice, found that under the system, the prevalence of ranking 3 candidates was lowest among African Americans, Hispanics, voters with less education, and those whose first language was not English. Although I proved this to Representative Amberwan in question, many other speakers during this debate have continued to linger on it, so it's time to answer it once and for all. Ranked choice voting does not solve these problems. This is important because according to a 2015 study by Burnett, a substantial number of voters either cannot or choose not to rank multiple candidates, even when they have the ability to do so. This contradicts the point of the entire system and increases the importance of other second and third choice ranks, which don't ensure that the representatives in our republic have the confidence and support of a majority in their decisions. Representative Saxena, you want to decrease the number of voters who are being left out, but understand that this legislation was proposed to ensure the equality of our votes. So we need to focus on who is being impacted. And this legislation does not do that. But secondly, we negate because ranked choice voting also provides voters with an incentive to vote strategically, just like Representative Osborne says. But it provides them with an incentive to tactically cheat the system and falsify their preferences for candidates. Contrary to what Representative Saxena says, according to an August 23rd, 2019 Heritage Foundation report by Spakowski, the tactic is to upvote your lesser evil candidate and bury your lesser evil candidate's most viable opponent. For example, According to a December 9, 2016 Cato Unbound article by Sorens, suppose 35% of voters prefer Bill Clinton to George H.W. Bush to Perot, 31% prefer Bush to Clinton to Perot, and 34% prefer Perot to Bush to Clinton. If everyone voted sincerely under ranked choice voting, Clinton would win after Bush would be eliminated in the first round, even though 65% of voters preferred Bush to Clinton. So we see that voters have a strategic incentive to falsify their preferences. Upon closer examination, we find that ranked choice voting is just a facade, all about political power and not what's best for the American people and for preserving the foundation that our great country was built upon. So we must fail.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. All questioners, please rise. That will go to Senator Moran.
Hi, Senator. So I'm a little confused. So why wouldn't people rank candidates at all with ranked choice voting? Why do you feel that way?
Because they don't have the education, they don't have the resources, and we've seen that it's the majority of low-income African Americans, Hispanics, and voters with less education. But we need to understand that today's legislation doesn't fix that. That's a problem to be addressed, but this legislation doesn't address it.
Yeah, so if candidates know that people are able to soon rank their candidates, won't they start campaigning and educating people more?
Unfortunately, people who don't have the resources are not going to do that.
But candidates have the resources to help educate their constituents, don't they?
But this bill doesn't impact that.
Yes, it does, because if a candidate knows that people are going to start ranking their candidates, they're going to want to get more votes, won't they? What stops them from?
But as I showed, even though they may be able to educate, the voters still have an incentive to falsify their preferences to get their candidate to win, because the situation is so confusing.
Okay, and if you're not just voting for your... Okay.
Questioning time is elapsed. Senator Osborne.
So I'm a little confused by your example. If the majority of people want a candidate, then doesn't that candidate automatically win under a ranked choice voting system?
No, so because the majority is
What
so
is the
close,
trigger for it to begin?
if there's not a clear majority, the thing is that the person only with the clear majority in a ranking. So if the candidate voted third was the only candidate that most people voted third, that's the candidate that will prevail. If the ranks between first and second...
What happens in a ranked choice voting system is so the only way that the system starts is if there's no one that has 50% or higher, right? And then they'll eliminate the person with the least amount of first place votes, and they'll give those votes to their second choice. So you're never going to have someone where it's a vast majority of people didn't want them in office.
But because of the 50% majority, because of the 50% majority, that's what confuses people, and that's what leads to that example.
But wouldn't they just rank who they want and vote for who they want?
Because of the confusion, they have to falsify their preferences.
Time has elapsed. Thank you. Are there any motions? Senator Osborne.
Motion to previous question.
Is there a second on the motion? Any objections? Assuming unanimous consent, the motion passes. So now we'll go into the closing appeal. My time signals for the closing appeal are as final. At 1 minute, you'll receive one finger, and then at 1 minute and 20 seconds, you'll get counted down until 1:30, and at 1:30, I will count you off. So there will be no grace period after that. With that being said,
and that's 1 minute. Correct.
What was that?
That's 1 minute. It's not 1 minute remaining.
1 minute elapsed. Yes. So at 1 minute, you'll get one finger, and then 1:20, you'll get the countdown, and then at 1:30, I'll cut you off. With that being said, we're going to start off with the author of the bill. That was Senator Osborne. Senator Osborne, you were recognized.
Great. So I'm just going to assume that PO and judges are ready, just like last time. And I did realize that with my first speech, I did not give my speaker code. So for the reference of the judges, I'm speaker code 120, 120. Great. So time will start on my first word. I don't have some sort of flowery intro. I just have a lot to talk about. So I'm going to get right into it. There are two main issues that need to be discussed in this debate that have gone untouched and unsolved. Firstly, let's talk about the Constitution. Senator Kumar brings up Smith versus Albright, but he's fundamentally mistaken on what that did. I have an exact quote from that decision, which said that they are not allowed to intervene except in the interest of fair methods and fair expression of their members. This could very well fall into that line, because it could show that it is increasing the democratic participation and the expression of their members as stated by the affirmation. So so it is not disproven by Smith and Allwright. In fact, it is allowed by Smith and Allwright. But to address Senator Kumar's concern that this opens the floodgates for potential dictatorships choosing what happens, we actually turn to another Supreme Court case, the California Democratic Party versus Jones, which says specifically what you are worried about, that they are not allowed to control who the parties admit or endorse. So they aren't going to be able to choose that. Nextly, let's talk about voter exhaustion. Kumar, Morales, and Talreja. The worst case scenario under your exhaustion method is that they only rank one person and no one else. That's the status quo. Your worst case scenario is the status quo. So what we're seeing is that we are providing something better. To go to Talreja's chocolate analogy, this is like if you want to buy a Toblerone, but you're forced to buy the last one no matter what. It is for these reasons that we affirm.
Time is elapsed. Speaking time is elapsed. Excuse me. Seeing that was the author's closing appeal, we're now in line for the negation's final appeal. That will go to Senator Kumar. Is recognized.
Thank the chair. Once again, that's Senator Kumar, last name spelled Kumar. My speaker code is 125. Just any indication from the judges if you're not ready, otherwise I'll go ahead and begin. Funnily enough, I divided today's debate into the same two categories as my good friend on the affirmative side, Senator Osborne. First, let's talk about constitutionality. So the National Constitution Center tells us in September of 2015 that primaries, as I said, are run by political parties, they're private organizations. The federal government can't interfere except in specific cases, and this is where they bring up Smith v. Allwright and the confusion that's inserted. So the Smith v. Allwright quote that Senator Osborne gave you is slightly out of context. What the Supreme Court was saying was that the Texas Democratic Party had violated the 14th Amendment by stopping African Americans from voting at the polls. The decision said the federal government can interfere only when constitutional rights like the 14th, 15th, or 17th Amendment are being violated. So I challenge the affirmation. Show me where rights are being violated and I'll agree with you. But they never did. Why? Because our current voting system, although it may have problems, does not abridge someone's constitutional rights in the first past the post manner. So when we come to constitutionality, this bill is unconstitutional. It doesn't take a lawyer to see that. And yes, my 7th grade civics class may have been basic, but it taught me enough to know that we can't pass unconstitutional legislation. Second, the idea of the fact that your vote's going to count more if candidates drop out. That's not true, and that just happens because of different dates. So I want to take the example of Virginia, my home state. We had a Democratic primary. We voted for candidates. We voted for candidates in the primary. What actually happened is we were voting for people to represent us at our state nominating convention, where they then picked candidates to represent us at the DNC. But here's the deal. Once those candidates were picked to represent us at the DNC, that was the end. If someone dropped out later in the race, whoever represented them, they could change their vote as it is. And RCV does not change the problem of different dates.
Time is elapsed. Thank you. With that being said, I'm sorry, I was muted. With that being said, we're going to go directly into the vote. So with that being said, all those who want to pass today's legislation, please rise. 1, 2, 3. All those who wish to fail today's legislation, please rise. 1, 2, 3, 4. On a vote to 3 to 4, this legislation fails. With that being said, are there any motions? Senator Osborne.
Seeing a natural break in debate, I move to a brief 5-minute recess.
Is there a second on that motion? Any
From
objection?
the judges, let me know if you're not ready. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and begin. Alrighty, I think everybody's ready, so I'll go ahead and begin. Our country is built on the idea of free market capitalism. So it's no surprise there's a great debate between where we draw the line between government enterprise and the free market. But I think everybody on both sides of that debate can agree that when human and civil rights are in question, private industry plays no place. Unfortunately, with our system of private prisons, we're sacrificing human and civil rights at the altar of the mighty dollar. That has to change. Pass my legislation today to end private prisons. First, I want to show you exactly what the issue is with private prisons. Then I'll show you how my legislation solves that. So the issue with private prisons is that, as the New York Times explains on April 3rd, 2018, they have generally worse conditions, they have lower guard pay, and less training when compared to their government-run counterparts. The reason for this is pretty obvious. Private prisons are privately owned, obviously, so they have a fiduciary responsibility to their stockholders and their owners to make as much money as possible. So as a result, They cut corners. They take shortcuts. They try and save money as much as possible. This ends up with horrible results. As the Inspector General of the Department of Justice tells us in a report dated August of 2016, there are 160% more reports of mistreatment in private prisons when compared to their government-run counterparts. Once again, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. When private industry cuts corners, bad things happen. Human and civil rights are being violated in these private prisons. Prisoners are being excessively harshly punished by being put in these private prisons, where we see increased instances, as the report says, of assault, rape, beatings, theft, and so much more, because these prisons are being so horribly mismanaged. At the end of the day, private companies save money, they mismanage their prisons. This is furthered in a report by the Sentencing Project on August 2nd, 2018, which explains that when they sign contracts, private prison companies include a bed requirement, basically saying if the government does not have a certain number of prisoners in this prison, they have to pay to make up for the empty bed space. All this does is encourages our government, to incarcerate more prisoners over time, only increasing the problem of mass incarceration in our country. So that's the problem with private prisons. Let me explain why we haven't solved it yet and how this legislation fixes this. So the Sentencing Project, in the same report, as long as the New York Times on August 18, 2016, explained the reason that we haven't moved away from private prisons is that the Department of Justice simply says we don't have enough space in existing public prisons to hold all the prisoners, especially because of increased mass incarceration and the newer incarceration of illegal immigrants. There simply isn't the room. However, my legislation solves for that, because what we do under Section 1 is we actually just take over the private prisons and convert them to public facilities. This means we have all the room we need. We have this power under eminent domain. We have all the room we need to store our prisoners overall. So yes, it'll cost money, but money is worth more than the human rights that are being trampled upon in these private prisons. So at the end of the day, just to sum up everything that's going on, in the status quo, our private prisons are being mismanaged. They're run by private companies. Private companies try and save money. Bad things happen. The reason we haven't fixed it yet is because we don't have room in public prisons. This bill changes all that, converts the private prisons to public prisons, saves human rights, puts the government in charge, solves all our problems. Pass.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes exactly. All questioners, please rise. That will go to Senator Taxina.
Hi, Senator. So if the choice of the government is either to put a prisoner in jail and pay for the cost of that prisoner, or pay for an empty bed, right?
Right.
So if the price is the exact same either way, and the government is spending the same amount of money, what is the incentive to put a person in jail if they're spending the same amount of money either way?
Right, so the way the contracts are structured, it's actually cheaper for the government to put someone in jail as opposed to paying for the private
Okay,
prison.
so does the government put prisoners in jail, or is that the responsibility of our court system?
Right, so the court system is indirectly influenced by these contracts. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
So, like, an independent judge is like, I'm going to put an innocent person in jail. Is that what you're telling me? The system of our the status quo of our justice system is.
So first off, it's a little more complicated than that, right? The question is about sentencing and things like that.
No. I'm just asking. What's the government?
Right, so I understand how it sounds, but I'm telling you, it's a little more complicated than that, right? When we're talking about it's not an innocent person, right? It's sentencing, it's deciding whether someone gets jail or parole or things like that. All those decisions come into play.
Question time is elapsed, Senator Batad.
Okay, let's go after the last senator's argument. Why exactly would an independent judge want an innocent person to be in a private prison? What do they gain?
Right. So there's two things here, right? First, I'm not only talking about judges. I'm talking about parole boards and things like that. Every facet of our government that deals with deciding how someone goes to prison, they're biased in favor of putting that person in prison because of the contracts we have with private prisons.
No, wait. So, why would an independent law officer, or like, let's say like the LAPD, want to put a person, why would they want to put a person in a private prison rather than the public?
Right, Senator. So as we've seen from recent events in our country, we all wish our judiciary was independent, fully race blind, everything like that. But we know for a fact it's not, right? We have to take a look at the realities on the ground, and you can see from what I'm telling you, it's true that mass incarceration is a problem in our country. It's true that too many people are going to jail, and this only plays a part in that.
Okay, but it was okay. Why? No, but you still haven't answered my question. Why?
I'm pretty sure I answered your question, Senator.
Why exactly would a judge want to incarcerate an innocent person?
Right. So when it comes to the municipality or the county or the federal government, when the federal government makes
maybe seated. Thank you. Seeing that was an author and on the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. All negation speakers, please rise. The chair would interject that you have a motion for a recess, seeing that we don't have a first negation speaker rising. Senator Kamara?
I motion for a 2-minute recess so we can figure out what's going to happen.
Is there a second on that motion? Any objections? Assuming unanimous consent, the motion passes.
Okay. Wait. Just to clarify, who gave the negs? Who is doing neg for this bill?
I have a neg, but I was planning to run like the last speech of the round. I can give it earlier. I would just need like a recess or someone else to give a neg, and then I can give the
Okay.
one.
Okay. So I know me and Ojasvi had negs prepared. Who else had the other neg?
I'm working on one now.
Okay. All right. Get like if you can extend the recess by 1 minute, I can probably like come up with just insert.
Wait, so how many people? What's the split? I thought we had.
The split's four Fs and 3 negs.
That's
I
fine.
have an egg ready.
4 and 3 is fine because that's what you're gonna get anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I can actually. I was thinking to flip my F to a neg.
Okay, then that just means that we'll have 4 negs and 3 Fs.
Yeah, I think I'll anyways be last because of precedence.
Wait. If
But then
it's
we can keep it
possible,
as an
can I like motion to extend the recess by 1 minute so I can like prepare my neg?
I mean, we have 1 minute left in the recess, but if you really want to, I guess it's
Okay.
fine because
All right, cool. Just give me 1 second, and I will do that.
all right, that recess has ended. But I heard you guys want to do another recess, so someone want to motion that? Senator Osborne,
Motion for a 1 minute recess.
is it a second? Any objection? Assuming unanimous consent, the motion passes.
Okay, I think I have a neg sponsor prep, so I'm good. Think for that.
Perfect timing. A recess has ended. Everyone, please enter. Give you 1 second. Cool. Alrighty. We just left off on our author, Senator Kumar, sponsorship. We are now online for a speech in the negation. All negation speakers, please rise. Senator Batad, unopposed.
Thank you, Senator. For judge's reference, I'm I'm Senator Batad speaking for the third time in this legislative chamber. My speaker code is 106, and I will begin whenever you guys are ready.
He spoke 6 on the last piece of legislation.
Sorry. Wait. Sir. What was the PO's comment?
What was that?
What was your comment? Sorry.
Oh, I just said what you spoke on the last bill.
Yeah. Okay. And just give I hope my judges can give me a minute to just get the timer set up. Okay. At the leisure of all those above me and outer smell, I'm ready. Prison is a place to help reinstate prisoners to society. It's a place to pay their debts, and since there are so many public prisons, they need help. All this bill does is make the quality of public prisons worse and abuse our constituents further. Firstly, private prisons are way better at handling the prisoners, as well as provide public prisons with many of the things they need to operate. The reason this nation has institutions like prison is to exercise a sense of reform, to help prisoners rehabilitate themselves back into society. However, this bill does the exact opposite by cutting off the main provider for many of the goods that keep public prisons alive and functioning and give less successful and less experienced people the power to keep public prisons in check. It's basic common sense as to why private prisons are better at housing prisoners, both humanely and in a rehabilitative sense. My piece of evidence would directly contradict with Senator Kumar's. According to the Department of Justice, 89% of prisoners that serve their sentences in private prisons never committed a crime again after leaving. And furthermore, 68% use skills learned from these prisons to apply in life after prison successfully. What the affirmation will tell you is that prison is supposed to be a candy land filled with unicorns and rainbows. But the cold hard truth is the fact that public prisons offer little to none of the amenities that private prisons do, and they're just not as successful. Rehab should work like this, where prisons have the ability for them to find different avenues and passions. But a person cannot understand their mistakes if they don't understand what they did wrong. Even though Senator Kumar says that they get paid for simply occupying more beds, I have to side with the impartial judge, the law officer doing his civic duty, and the constituent reporting wrongdoing, that there's no way those three categories of people would put an innocent person behind bars. But secondly, private prisons are the life force behind public prisons. The CEA, GEO, and MTC cater almost 1,100 public prisons across 35 states, providing the basic necessities to the healthcare, food, transport, electric monitoring, and drug treatment programs. In the modern age, all of this equipment and delivery is necessary to keep a prison running. But by transferring the very same correctional facilities into public correctional facilities, we bankrupt these companies, meaning that many of the supplies that these prisons deem necessary will no longer be available to them, making these prisons more worse and underfunded. Prison is a place for reform, not one for vacation. But by employing this bill, we only hurt the public prisons more that we're trying to better and get rid of amazing options for these prisoners to learn and grow. Next, let's talk about Senator Kumar and how his entire argument is the fact that judges are willing to put innocent people behind bars. That makes no sense. And as I did in cross-ex, what incentive does a judge, when every prisoner has the right to a trial, want to put an innocent person in a private prison? Because the judge doesn't gain anything, and that just doesn't help them. Today, we've seen the fact that private prisons have programs to spark prisoners' interest and help them when they've served their time. But by employing this bill, we encourage the downfall of high-quality rehabilitation, shut down private prisons, and severely wound public ones. Negate this bill and give our constituents the right to better themselves while they have paid their debts to society.
Any of that speech, 3 minutes and 9 seconds. All questioners, please rise. That will go to Senator Morales.
Hey, Senator Batad, great speech. Sir, are you essentially implying that private prisons are beneficial to prisoners?
Yes, because they actually provide more academically and educational resources that help them learn and grow, which actually is what rehab should be about. Prisoners should find their own mistakes, not have the mistakes forced into them.
Are prisoners exploited in these systems? Are you aware of exploitations occurring?
You can probably further provide me with information, but I do not believe. I do not believe there's exploitation.
Back on that same line of questioning, how about state funding for private prisons?
Well, this bill only applies to federal private prisons, so it doesn't matter for state.
Oh, okay, it doesn't matter, but other ones aren't affected, right?
But the state private prisons are not affected, so we can't really discuss those.
Okay. All right, I rescind my time.
That'll go to Senator Kumar.
Hi, Senators. You said private prisons reduce recidivism.
Yes.
What was the exact statistic the percentage you gave us?
I can provide that for you. Give me 1 second. The Department of Justice, 89% of prisoners that served their sentences in private prisons did not commit a crime again after leaving. And furthermore,
what was the date on that report?
I'd have to research that again. Sorry, Senator.
So, Senator, you can't give us the date on this number you cited?
Sorry, this is a speech that I used a while ago, and I do not have the date on me. So
Senator, if you can't give us the date, how are we supposed to trust it?
Because, Senator, it's still, I can assure you.
Okay, so let's do some logic, right? Private prisons make money when more people are in their jails, right?
Sure.
So why would they work to decrease recidivism? Isn't it in their incentive to put more people in jail?
You can't have more prisoners when there's no reason for a prisoner to be in the jail.
My question is, why would private prisons and put in place like rehabilitation programs if they make money from people being in jail.
Okay, you have to understand the fact that private prisons only operate on the fact if they have prisoners. But why would a judge condemn a prisoner if they did nothing wrong?
Seeing as the speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. That will go to Senator of Recency. That will go to Senator Osborne.
I thank the chair for the reference of the judges. I was the sponsor on the previous piece of legislation. I put my jacket back on. I don't know about you guys, but where I'm living, San Diego, it is sweltering here. So with that, are all of my judges, I'm going to assume, are all ready and PO. So let me get my timer up so that I can time myself as well. All right, on my first word. My fellow senators, our country is built on the ideals of freedom, liberty, and justice for all people. These ideals began to be fully realized with the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which stated that no one can be forced to work against their will and with no compensation. This amendment was supposed to bring an end to slavery in America and bring the start of equality for African Americans in this country. However, through loopholes in the 13th Amendment and the privatization of our prison system, we find that these ideals are yet to be achieved. It is because private prisons are the worst exploiters of this loophole that I stand in the affirmation of this bill. Firstly, let's look at the history and the loophole in the 13th Amendment. It all falls in one little subclause stating that slavery is illegal, quote, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. And this wasn't an accident either. The writers of this original amendment knew that it would lead to legal slavery in our prisons, and it did. And this is because they passed vagrancy laws that would require newly freed Black people to have jobs or be arrested. So, Senator Batad, when you're wondering about, well, why would they possibly throw someone in jail that is innocent? The thing is that our system is at its core corrupt and unequal. We need to fix that, yes, but one of the main exploiters of this system is our private prison system. And here's why. According to the ITPI, they find that incarceration in private prisons increases the risk of recidivism by almost 20%, contrary to what you have to say. This is because they are not just, because like Senator Kumar said, not only are there worse conditions, but they're actually incentivized to keep these people in there. According to that same report by the ITPI, which stands for In the Public Interest, we actually find that most contracts that private prisons have with the government have what are known as prisoner quotas. 65% of these contracts for counties and states and federal prisons all have found that these private prisons must keep over 80% of their beds filled. So because these private prisons are a business and these prisoners are their product, they are actually incentivized to keep perpetuating that system and continue to put more innocent people in jail. And this is done through lobbying. CCA, one of the largest providers in the entire country of private prisons, is actually a massive force of lobbying $22.2 million in just 2019 alone. What we see is that the Sentencing Project found that the vast majority of this prison labor, this slave prison labor that I mentioned earlier, occurs in private prisons. The prisoners are the product. The private prisons are a business, and they will continue to exploit this loophole until we stop private prisons. To be clear, I want this loophole fixed entirely, but we must address the main exploiter, and that is private prisons. Only then can we fix the loophole. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 14 seconds. We're now online for 2 minutes of direct questioning. All questioners, please rise. That goes Senator Batad.
Okay, Senator, so you talk about the fact that you talked about the contradiction that I had where there's no reason for the judges to actually to condemn the prisoners, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What exactly is the pledge for a judge when they sign into judgeship?
Sure, they can pledge that. But what we
No,
see
no,
is
no,
that
the
they
pledge,
aren't.
The pledge literally states
Are you
that they
denying that our
cannot
justice
be
system
impartial.
is racist?
And
Are you
okay,
denying that our justice system is racist?
no. Why would it be corrupt when when the exact judges have nothing to gain by putting these prisoners away?
It simply is. That's how the system
Okay.
always has been.
Can you
can
provide
find
me a
Innocence
single
Project
source
finds that
as
there
to
are
why
hundreds of
it is correct?
thousands of innocent people. We've had people put on death row who have later been exonerated by DNA evidence. Your claim is that no innocent person ever goes to jail, and that is
No,
provably false.
I'm not saying that, but what do the judges have to gain by putting innocent people away?
A lot of times they're lobbied by CCA and other private prisons.
Questioning time has elapsed. Senator Tariha.
Hi, Representative. So I want to expand on where Representative Batad left off. So you talk a lot about the lobbying that these private prisons do, but do you know anything about the lobbying that the public prisoner guards unions do?
No, I don't. What I do know is that these prison systems are incentivized to pass laws which increases incarceration because that's how they make their money.
Okay. And secondly, I want to ask, how much time and how much money do you think the transition from private prisons to public prisons will take?
I don't think it'd take that much time at all. We already have all the facilities in place. As Senator Kumar said,
Where
his
are
bill
the
and
facilities?
domain. So we can just use the existing facilities that are
Oh.
currently used as private
But
prisons
how much time?
as public systems.
How much time do you think it will take to get the employees, and how much money do you think it will take to get those employees in place?
Oh, I don't really know how much time and
Government
money it takes. All I know is the main cost
much
would be the
taxpayer money?
facilities, which we already have, right?
Questioning time has elapsed. Again, seeing another speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. That will go to Sakina on recency.
All right, thank you. I'm just pulling up a timer. My speaker code is actually 131. I think I said the wrong number last time, so I apologize. All right. And okay, cool. When the first private prison opened in 1984, this Congress seemed to have thrown away the key to a fair justice system. Today, we only keep it locked because we aren't providing any new opportunity under public prisons. Mr. Kumar and Mr. Osborne first perpetuate this argument that the government puts prisoners in jail in order to save money. So let's go back to 7th grade civics and understand why that's entirely false. The Constitution allows for the separation of powers under the executive, judicial, and legislative branch. The courts, in the Constitution, it quite literally allows for judicial independence. It's as simple as that. So, do laws such as mandatory minimums, 3 strikes, and the war on drugs have an effect on our judicial system? Yes. But Mr. Kumar, if you're arguing that a member of the federal government can go to an independent judge and force them to prosecute for higher jail time, not only is that illegal, but now I'm worried about what you're doing in your free time. But next, even if that was true, if the choice is either to put a prisoner in jail and pay for that or to pay for an empty bed, the price is logically the exact same, unless Mr. Kumar can prove it is actually more expensive for an empty. That's actually more expensive. It's just entirely false. But next, let's understand why private prisons actually exist in the first place and why their positive impacts exist. Mr. Batad explains that they have lower resources in these private prisons, in public prisons. But let's understand why that's the case to understand how Mr. Kumar's argument that it's just a problem with funding falls flat. Because public prisons have staffing shortages. According to the Pew Research Center in May 2016, 1 in 3 officer jobs is open. In the 2 most understaffed prisons, half the jobs are open. Most New Mexico officers leave within 3 years, even as states are looking to reduce sentences for minor offenses. So, Mr. Kumar, unless we can come up with new guards, there is literally zero viability for expanding our public prison system. But next, what happens if we do pass, even though 1/3 of our officer jobs are already open? That's because, as Pew Research continues, understaffed prisons result in longer hours, fatigue and stress for guards, and canceled recreational and social programs for inmates, such as family visits. all of which can lead to potentially dangerous situations. We need private prisons because they are the only ones capable of providing our resources. Not only is it just a problem of a lack of resources, Mr. Kumar, it's a problem of we don't even have the people to administer those resources. Unless the affirmation can prove that officers will be available to staff public prisons, they are entirely unviable if we are expanding them. Even though private prisons may not be perfect, they are quite literally the only key we have to actual opportunity for our prisoners. That's why you fail.
Thank you for that speech time. 3 minutes exactly. We're now live for 2 minutes of direct questioning. All questioners, please rise. That will go to Senator. That will go to Senator Osborne.
Hi, Senator. So you talked about how these prisons are not going to be incentivized to put more people in there because of the cost that the empty
cost,
bed
like,
versus
has to be the
prisoners the
exact
exact same thing, right?
Yes.
Do you know about how the contracts between private prisons and the
So
government
the way the
are
contracts work is that they have a contract and they have like a capacity level they must be filled to. Usually that's around 90 to 100%. If they've already paid for the contract, then yes, that private prison needs the resources that it would have gotten from that prisoner to administer to everyone. So either one,
right?
you have
But
the
they
same
lose
amount.
that contract if they dip below that quota. If they dip below that capacity, so aren't they incentivized to arrest people and throw them in jail, even if they are
Mr. Osborne, private prisoners, private prison corrections officers are not police officers. The justice system.
No, but they lobby, don't they? Doesn't PCA lobby? Weren't private prisons lobbying
if I'm a
very
private
big
prison,
part
I
of the
can't
war on
like
drugs, for example?
if I'm a private prison, I can't lobby a judge and tell them to put someone in jail. That's illegal.
Question time is elapsed, Senator Kumar.
Hi, Senator. So let's talk about this whole misconception about judges putting innocent people in jail. So I actually agree with you, right? Judges are pretty independent for the most part, right? But say you have a police officer who arrests someone for having an ounce of weed. Now they get to make a decision, right? Do they arrest that person or let him off with a warning? So police officers have discretion, don't they?
I mean, no, because
police officers don't have discretion.
Okay, Mr. Kumar.
So it's a yes or no. Do police officers have discretion?
Can I please answer your question?
It's a yes or no question.
Can I answer your question?
Do police officers have discretion? I just want an answer, yes or no.
Yes, they do have discretion.
Okay, so police officers have discretion. In states where there's an incentive for lockup quotas, wouldn't the police officers be more likely to arrest someone with their discretion?
Okay, even if they arrest someone, you don't have a trial by jury when you're arrested.
Okay.
You have a
Again,
trial
so there's a wide range of options. If someone's carrying an ounce of weed, right, which is punishable by jail time.
Can I just explain something? A police officer, even if they arrest someone, that doesn't mean they are convicted.
Well, mandatory minimum laws mean the person they arrested go to jail, doesn't it?
They're non-unique. They happen in.
How is that non-unique?
Question time is elapsed. Thank you. Seeing that was a speech on the affirmation on negation, speakers, please rise. That will go to Senator Morales.
Iris, I'm speaking on the affirmation.
Oh, sorry, on the affirmation.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Perfect. That's Senator Morales, spelled Morales. Speaking for the second time in this legislative session, my code is 109. Just any indication when you're ready, and I'll begin. Okay. Former New York City Police Commissioner Bernard B. Carrick once said, "Don't promote yourself as a country of constitutionality and compassion if you honestly believe putting people in prison and treating them like animals is justified. Stop all the hype that we live in a free and democratic society." I used to ramble on about the same stuff, but now are we really a country that believes in fairness and compassion? It is time we finally become one. Pass. But now first, you pass because private prisons caused a bigger federal debt. And for example, let's use Montgomery County when they decided to construct the Joe Corley Detention Facility operated by the GEO Group. The private prison took $45 million in bond to construct. It has left the county with a large financial burden as well. Even though the facility opened in August of 2008, there are no inmates in the prison. Unfortunately for the county, according to County Judge Alan B. Sadler, he did not anticipate the potential loss of its tax exempt status. According to Sadler, if the county loses its tax exempt status, the tax implications would be huge, harming our very own American citizens. But now, second, you pass because this bill puts an end to the exploitation of immigrants and minority groups. So Senator Batad and Senator Saxena, here's your wake-up call. In the wake of President Trump's crackdown on immigration, private prisons have found that they can prosper from this, but not in a moral way. When we end private prisons, we end mass imprisonment of our minority communities to continue to be unbated. To these corporations, each prisoner represents profit rather than a person. There is no interest in rehabilitating people, no matter what negation speakers come up here and say. And guess whose fault that is? It is us and what our Congress has actually done in the status quo that has perpetuated this. Let's turn to the grassroots leadership, where they state that Congress ensures private profit prisons with an immigrant detention quota, a quota that mandates at least 34,000 immigrants remain detained on a daily basis. The reason why we see minorities disproportionately harmed is because of our very Congress's failure to implement policies that hinder with private prisons' ability to overpower anything. More than 2/3 of immigrant detainees were housed in private facilities. Today, we have the power to fix our mistakes and put an end to the unwavering cycle of abuse that private prisons inevitably perpetuate. Preserve our prosperity. Let's start believing in fairness and compassion and pass today's legislation.
Thank you for that speech at 2 minutes and 43 seconds. We're now live for 2 minutes of questioning. All questioners, please rise. All questioners, please. Oh, thank you. Senator Saxena.
Okay, so do we still need a place to house illegal immigrants?
Yes.
Okay, so if private prisons no longer do, and public prisons are so understaffed, is it safer for an illegal immigrant to be in a public, understaffed prison or where they are right now?
They're not, if you ask me, they shouldn't be in prisons at all.
Right, but that's not what this legislation does, right? Like, even though we
Right,
get
but
rid
at
of
the same
private
time, what
prisons,
it does is exacerbate this for low-income immigrants.
but even if we pass, illegal immigrants are still going to be in detention centers, correct?
But today's
So would
legislation
you rather have those
and the
immigrants be in
exploitation of
detention
immigrants
centers that
in
are
private
staffed?
prisons.
Sorry?
But today's legislation puts an inevitable end to the exploitation of
Okay,
immigrants
but
and
Ms. Morales, there's just one question, right? If we arrest an illegal immigrant, like we are required to do by law, they have to go to some kind of prison, yes? The only option is then a public prison. Would it be safer for them to be at a public prison with no one there or a private?
There's someone up the next block. Senator Saxena, you get the next one.
Okay, so would it do we agree? An illegal immigrant, even though it might be unfair, like you had talked about, do they still have to end up in a prison?
Private prison conditions serve to be much worse than public prison.
Okay, so I proved that public prisons are drastically understaffed, correct?
100%.
Is it safer for an illegal immigrant to be in a prison that literally doesn't have officers, or is it safer for them to be somewhere where they actually have like some degree
I would rather them go to a public prison than them to be seen as
our public prisons have officers? That's a very simple
but
question.
they are seen as walking dollar bills.
Okay, so if an illegal immigrant needs to be in a prison somewhere, is it better for them to be in a prison
I've
where
already
there are
answered
officers?
Senator, a public prison.
Even though public prisons don't have officers, they aren't going to have recreational visits, social visits, all of that because of the lack of funding?
Senator Saxena, I already said this several times. I'd rather them go to a
Time's elapsed.
I thank the chair.
Are there any motions? Seeing none, seeing no speech in the affirmation on negation, speakers, please rise. Senator Taria, unopposed.
I thank the chair. Once again, my name is Representative Tareja. I'm speaking for the second time in this session, and my number is 114 for the judges. Any indication when you're ready, and I'll begin. Okay. Ending mass incarceration is a rallying cry of civil rights organizations, faith institutions, legal groups, academics, and even people directly affected by the system. But when we paint the picture with facts and not biased opinions and focus on how we can truly help our constituents, we can see that the minds behind private prisons are invaluable, so we must fail. First, let's establish that public prisons are not what the affirmation has cracked them up to be, as particularly seen in the last questioning block between Mr. Morales and Mrs. Morales and Ms. Saxena. According to a February 24, 2015 Washington Post article by Voloco, the government inherently has a conflict of interest when it comes to reviewing the performance of its own prisons and guards, leading to the grandiose statistics we see being preached to us by the affirmation. Representative Osborne, when you question the motives and lobbying of private prisons, you should instead explain to us whose interests powerful prison guards unions like the California Correctional Peace Officers Association are representing, when according to a July 26, 2017 U.S. News article by Galvin, they spend millions of dollars on lobbying for and pushing ballot initiatives for more prisons, longer prison sentences, harsher parole rules, more prison guards, and more. One thing is clear. Public prison unions certainly aren't on board with today's criminal justice reform movement. Which brings me to my second contention. If reform-minded individuals agree that prison time should be used to prepare inmates for release, it's important to note that where occupational rehabilitative services currently exist in United States correctional facilities, the private and nonprofit sectors usually provide them. According to a July 29, 2019 Insider Source article by Stewart, designing a new prison programs that better accommodate rehabilitative and professional training services requires forward thinking, which government-run correction systems typically lack. And this is where the profit motive of private companies can serve the public good. So although this has been talked about before in this debate, allow me to show you an example. In a February 25th, 2019 Pulitzer report, private prison companies entered into a pair of public-private partnerships in Oceania. Under these partnerships, the companies could earn a cash payment of up to $2 million if they reduced recidivism rates by 12%. And if the rate of recidivism for indigenous prisoners was 14% less than the rate for the same population in the government's prison system, they would receive an additional bonus. Motivated by the contract, the companies designed cells to offer ample natural light, televisions and computers to help inmates read and learn, fitness facilities, counseling, parenting, and job training are also offered. So we see that the government knows it can save money in the long term if people don't return to prison and is working with the private sector to design a system best equipped to achieve that goal. We see that if we refocus our efforts, we can avoid the million-dollar transition to public prisons and utilize private prisons to achieve the interests of our constituents. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 58 seconds. All questioners, please rise. I'll go to Senator Kumar.
Hi, Senator. So in defense of private prisons, you cited a report about Oceania, right?
Yes.
So Oceania is a different continent, isn't it?
Yes.
Are things very different in terms of how people are treated in the whole justice system in Oceania versus America?
Is because there are many parallels that have been brought up in this debate. For example, there's the overrepresentation that Representative Morales brought up of immigrants and also like minority groups.
Right, Senator, but in general, is the character of the justice system in places like New Zealand or Australia different from the character of the justice system in America?
Yes, but the reason.
So is it fair? Is it fair to make that comparison,
in this
Senator?
case, yes, because the issue they're trying to solve is the same. It's the same fundamental issue. Right,
but if the character of the justice system is different, how can you just make that comparison? It's like an apples to oranges comparison, isn't it? It's two different systems, basically.
Well, this privatization bill isn't going to help our interests anyway. So I'm proposing another alternative that we should focus on before making $1 million transition.
Okay.
Senator Osborne.
Hi, Senator. So you talk about the CCPOA, right? As a politician from California, I am aware of how politically powerful they are. But does the CCPOA only include public prison guards, or does it not include private prison guards too?
It's a prison guard union, so it mainly focuses on the interests of the public prison guards as they are the majority of that union.
So are you saying that just because they're in prisons, they can't be in a union?
No, what I'm saying is that the interests of those public prison guards do not support the government's portrayal of them.
The CCPOA deals with prison guards that work for public and private prisons. So wouldn't that lobbying be non-unique and just be about prisons in general, not public prisons? Whereas the lobbying from something like CCPA is unique to just these private prisons.
Well, okay, what you're saying is that this organization is also influenced by private prisons, right? But don't you
saying
agree
that
that the
they
majority
also
of the people
serve
in the prison guard
private
union
prisons.
are public prison guards?
Questioning time's elapsed. Speaker may be seated. Seeing that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers please rise. All affirmative speakers please rise. The chair highly frowns upon a one-sided debate. All negation speakers please rise. Senator Amravon unopposed.
This is Senator Amravon speaking for the second time this session. Just give me an indication when you guys are ready, and I'll be happy to begin. All right. Some things are best kept private. Social security numbers, government secrets, all of our tax returns, but most importantly, our prisons. The affirmation characterizes private prisons as greedy for money, yet fail to recognize the opportunities that they provide to America's most marginalized. Local communities benefit when private prisons are built. 70% of private prisons are in rural, low-income communities, which is a shocking statistic, but it's integral to this debate. NPR explains that each year, GEO Group gives the county near their private prison $4,000 for school scholarships and $6,000 for maintenance and upkeep of the city's courthouse. So basically what you see here is that a lot of these corporations that own private prisons are actually bolstering the surrounding communities and economies with grants, typically in low-income communities. Furthermore, Terry L. Stewart of the Department of Corrections in Arizona in November 2015 explains that a publicly operated prison is not subject to most local taxes. However, a private prison is typically subject to all of them. Private prisons improve the local economy of a community through its purchases and through its taxation. So tax money and employment is really important to these rural areas, but when we publicize prisons, they no longer have to pay these taxes. So we're removing crucial income and crucial parts of the economy and taxes going into these communities. The revival of local communities is so important, especially through jobs provided by these prisons, which is why we can't afford to hand over the oversight and can't afford to lose the taxation in those communities. Globalization has imprisoned rural America. Private prisons set it free. Moving on, Senator Kumar, I want to talk about what you brought up in questioning with Senator Saxena. Police officers do have discretion, but once again, I would like to reiterate that it is illegal to influence judges. Just because you are arrested doesn't mean you go to jail. Police officers cannot sentence you. Our law enforcement in prisons remains separate for this very reason. Senator Kumar, private prisons are actually safer than public ones, and they actually do help curb drug use because New York Times in September 2016 explains that private prisons are statistically better at finding, seizing, and recording contraband than their public counterparts. Furthermore, it shows that inmates in private prisons are less likely to use drugs and less likely to be subject to or involved in sexual misconduct. Senator Kumar, how can you say that private prisons don't prioritize their people when public prisons are evidently doing much worse when it comes to law enforcement and when it comes to taking care of their prisoners? Private prisons are inherently stricter, which ultimately makes for stronger rules and greater likelihood that rules are followed. Keeping prisons safe is our number one priority, but shifting enforcement does nothing about this because private prisons actually have better enforcement, unlike what Senator Kumar tells you. A vote in the affirmation throws away the key to an equal opportunity. But today, by negating, we keep this door unlocked. Fail.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 50 seconds. All questioners, please rise. That will go to Senator Kumar.
Hi, Senator. So you cited a report from the New York Times about how private prisons are safer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me who wrote that report?
No, I just cited the New York Times. Sorry.
Right. So I have the same report open. The date was September 12th, 2016, right?
Yeah.
So the authors at the bottom, it says the authors work for companies that run private prisons. Is it safe to take their opinion as fair when it comes to this source?
Yeah, so I didn't really cite the opinion. I actually cited a statistic saying that they are statistically better at finding, seizing, and recording contraband, and that they have lower rates of drug use. So
Right, but they drew upon data from a report compiled by private prisons companies, didn't they?
Sure, but I still believe statistical
So,
data.
Senator, if you're going to cite an opinion article written by people who work for private prison companies, why should we trust that source?
Because once again, they did this study. This is an accurate statistic that they found. I'm going to use it.
Okay, so don't you think it's possible that people who work for private prison companies could ignore other relevant evidence, such as the Department of Justice article, the New York Times article that have been cited by other senators in this round?
Sure, but this doesn't change the fact that public prisons don't have the same amount of enforcement.
I mean, do you have a source doesn't come directly from private prisons to say that?
I'm sure I could find many.
Senator Batad.
Okay, so I'm on your side, Senator, but I want to talk as an affirmative speaker. Why should we care about the local communities that are benefiting when a bunch of those same prisoners are being treated with maltreatment that are coming from other communities far away?
Yeah, so if we actually do publicize the prisons, like I stated, the treatment's going to get worse.
Okay, yeah, but then why? Okay, can you please I'm having a hard time understanding why exactly private prisons are better, because like public prisons can, as they don't enforce it stricter, but they still are exactly like they still don't harass them like a
We're
center.
not getting rid of the buildings, right? So private prisons are in
But they
70%
don't
of them
harass their constituents like Senator Kumar said.
so
Why
70
are they better?
Okay, so what private prisons are doing right now is they're contributing heavily to the economies of these low-income areas. They're helping
Question
people.
time has elapsed. Thank you. Speaker may be seated. We're going to unilaterally call for the question and spark the closing appeals. With that being said, the author, Senator Kumar, is recognized for a minute 30 speech.
I thank the chair. Once again, that's Senator Kumar, last name spelled Kumar, speaker code 125. For the judges, just let me know if you're not ready. Otherwise, I'll begin with what is probably my last ever competitive debate speech. All right, looks like we're all good to go. So in my final appeal, I want to put today's debate down into 3 simple categories. First, I want to address the biggest controversy we've seen, the idea that judges are putting innocent people in jail. So it might be my fault that this mischaracterization came up. Maybe I misspoke, but I want to be clear. Judges aren't putting innocent people in jail. That's not happening. It's about the discretion of police officers. It's about policies like catch and release, which the Trump administration ended to put more migrants in jail. This is how private prisons incentivize mass incarceration. They make it so the deck is stacked against prisoners. They make it so it's more than likely that prisoners are put in jail to fulfill the lockup quotas that they talk about. Politicians see it like this. If we're paying for the beds anyways, why not have prisoners to fill them? That's why private prisons increase mass incarceration. Second, Senators Batad, Talrija, and Umbervan come up here and they tell you that private prisons are actually better than public prisons. But they seem to have a couple problems with their sourcing. Senator Umbervan cites a source written by people who work for private prisons. Senator Batad gives us a source with no date. I, on the other hand, cited the Justice Department and the New York Times. Senator Osborne cited the New York Times and In the Public Interest. Other senators on the affirmation have given you clear, concise, accurate sources about how private prisons are worse than public prisons. Finally, Senator Saxena comes up here and tells you that public prisons are understaffed. And you know what? That's true. But that's why this bill goes into place in the year 2023. It gives us 3 years to fully figure out the logistics of transitioning from public to private prisons. 3 years to take over the private prison buildings and create the space we need. That's why this bill is going to be passed in 3 years. In sum, the concerns of the negation either fall flat or are unsubstantiated past this piece of legislation.
Thank you for that speech. 1 minute and 29 seconds. We're now in line for the negation closing appeal. That will go to Senator Batad.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Murguita. For my judge's convenience, my speaker code is 106, and I'm speaking for the 3rd time in this legislative session. Yeah, that's about it. So I'll get started at the leisure of all those above me and not respond ready. Thank you. Give me 1 second. I'm going to just time myself as well. The entire affirmation has made varied points, and I understand we misspoke and we're not able to provide the dates, the sites, and cited sometimes of mistakes. But throughout this entire debate, I've asked the question as to why a judge would be forced to increase jail time and put an innocent man behind bars. None of them could give me an answer. But now let's go through all the points of the affirmation and show them why they are fundamentally wrong. Senator Kumar says that they are paid more per bed, which incentivizes private prisons to hold prisoners for longer. And what Senator Saxena says proves this immediately wrong, because it's the fact that an empty bed is paid for the same price as a full one. But then next, let's talk about the way these prisoners are acquired. They have to be convicted of a crime, despite what the affirmation says. No impartial judge would condemn a person that they deem innocent. No cop would convict a person that they think is doing something wrong doing something not wrong. And no person would unlawfully report a crime that isn't happening. Private prison cannot, or any government employee cannot convince an independent judge to increase sentences or convict innocent people. Also understand that public prisons are literally carried by private prisons. As the entire affirmation says, they make money off the prisoners. But what they don't consider is the fact that the private prisons use the same money to buy and sell to the public prisons and provide more of the actual resources. I know it's hard to think that prisoners are being hurt and bullied by our system, but that's all it is, a thought. We know these prisons help our constituents reduce recidivism rates and are better kept, and we cannot think public prisons do better.
Thank you for that speech. 1 minute, 30 seconds. We'll now go to previous question. All those who wish to pass today's legislation, please raise your placard. 1, 2, 3, 3. All those who wish to fail today's legislation, please raise your placard. 1, 2, 3, 4. On a vote of 3 to 4, this legislation does fail. I will then go into orders of the day. We've did a great job getting through 14 speeches and over 25 questions. Congratulations, everyone. With that being said, I now yield to Mr. Beck, who will go through his procedure.
I thank the chair. So everyone, congrats on making it this far. Thank you so much for a great last 2 prelim sessions. Right now, we'll be conducting the leadership award election. So at this time, I unilaterally moved to open the floor for leadership award elections. So that means if there was anyone who you saw act as a leader in the chamber, you can nominate them right now. Representative Osborne, do you have a nomination?
I'd like to nominate Representative Murguita for the leadership award.
All right, Representative Murguita. Are there any other nominations? Representative Morales?
I'd like to nominate Senator Kumar.
Senator Almervant?
I'd like to nominate Senator Saxena.
Any other nominations? Like, this is pretty free. Like, y'all can, like... All right, and I'm just gonna... Yeah, Representative, let's see, Kumar?
I nominate Senator Osborne.
All right, Senator Osborne. All right. Are there any other nominations? And I'm gonna assume that all 4 of you that have just been nominated accept, right? Awesome. Thanks, Isha. I'm ineligible though. Sorry, man. All right. So now I've just entered the candidates into the chat. Just pick, just vote for yeah. And whoever receives the most votes is our leadership board.
Is there a straw poll or how are we doing this?
Yeah, how are we voting?
Oh, just I'm too lazy to make a straw poll. Sorry, yo. Just type it in. Just private message it to me. Yeah.
Got it.
We might end up having a tie. Let's see. All right. The winner of our, hold up, let me just check that. I got everything right. All right. Congratulations to Mr. Murguita for winning our leadership award. Good job. Congrats.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Greatly appreciated.
And with that, I don't think there's anything else I have to do now. If any of the judges want to give general comments to the chamber, that'd be cool as well. Yeah.
I'm still in the Supreme Court debate. So Mr. Kumar, I think, has said this is his last competition, so it won't be helpful. But in general, when you're in a round, I'm just a lawyer. I'm not a professional debater. But it's like when someone tells you it's unconstitutional, for me, in the law, if you don't address that, I don't hear anything else until you address it. Because basically it's like saying, if someone says you're in the wrong class and you're going, but really I want to do the test. And they're like, no, you're not in the right class. It doesn't matter at that point if you want to do the test. So the secret weapon on the constitutional point, if you're in a round and you don't actually know the law, which let's face it, most of us don't, right? Even the lawyers don't know the law because the constitutional law is very, very complex, always. So there's always a line in every constitution. So Mr. Kumar made the constitutional point, but he overstated his point. He's saying they don't belong in primaries, and he's right, but there's a line, right? So somebody else, finally, Mr. Osborne, after he sort of ate your arms off a little bit in the questioning, but you came back to life and you go, no, there's a limit. You can't go this far. So that's always the point. If you don't know the answer on a constitutional point, go, you're overstating the law. There's a limit. And there's always a reasonableness to a constitutional point. Then Mr. Kumar comes back and he goes, right, okay, there's a limit, but the limit is like, it's only if it's discriminatory and things. So that's really, to me, where the big debate was. And I just love to see that sort of primary source debate, bringing in the law. Like lawyers say, don't tell me what Business Insider says about the law, just like tell me the actual law. So again, I'm not like maybe most judges, but I just love to see that come into the debate. I think you guys did a really good job there. Obviously, Ms. Saxena came in with, she, you know, at least refuted the point. It was a little weak, but at least she got it out. Like, this is like not constitutional. So it was an awesome debate. And I think anytime you have someone that makes a point you don't know, just construct an argument about the line. If it's absurd, it's probably not right. So just my tip, good congratulations to all of you. I hope to see many of you this year in competitions and final rounds. I think you're all very talented and I wish you all the best.
Oh, Mr. Moreland, do you have any comments by any chance? No. If not, that's completely fine. Yeah. We can adjourn for now, and then we'll try to get ranks out in like the next 10 minutes. So.
Oh, really? That quick?
Yeah, we're gonna grind.
Wow.
All right, we got you guys. Hopefully, we'll see you guys tomorrow in the finals. Some of you, yeah. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.